everybody, and welcome to this slightly different instalment of the GUIcast. We have an emergency podcast, if you will. There's a lot been going on recently around the club in terms of Al-Thani and the court cases. So we've had an end to the BlueBay case at Malaga. What does that mean for the club? And Sheikh Abdullah bin Nasser Al-Thani, who is the owner in quotation marks. We're going to tell you all the info about the BlueBay case. And I think before we dive into it, it's important to know that there are two different cases. So we'll call one the Malaga case and one the BlueBay case. Both are related, but they're very much two different cases. The question is, Nick, what are the two different cases?
Yeah, well, this is a bit of a, like you say, a strange podcast. I think the rest of the team have left it up to the boffins to really go through this, haven't they, Alex? And I think it's because we wear glasses. I generally think that's why we've been left to this job. But yeah, in short, the Malaga case started a few years ago when a complaint was filed by the Associated Small Shareholders, or what they refer to as the APA, who own collectively around 3% of the club. So you've got Al-Thani's company that owns 97%, and then you've got the Small Shareholders Association as well. And they brought this case against Al-Thani's three sons just for alleged irregularities in the management of the club, since they were part of the board of directors of the same company. So, in general, there were crimes of unfair administration, corporate crime, money laundering, and all these have been investigated, and all these allegations have been laid against Al-Thani to do that. So it's led to an investigation by the National Police. This is how serious it's got. And it's led to a decision by the judge in this case to basically take away control of the club from Al-Thani and his family, and to put a judicial administrator in position to lead the club, which is where we find ourselves right now.
So we know, obviously, BlueBay, we've heard of them. Chris rang them up on the podcast once, many moons ago.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain a little bit to the people who don't know, perhaps, who are BlueBay and what is the case about, and how did it all come about? How did it begin?
So BlueBay are basically this huge hotel business. When I read it, it said it was like the sixth biggest. I don't know if that's the sixth biggest in Spain or sixth biggest in the world. I've yet to clarify that, but they're basically led by a name you'll start to hear a lot more often in Malaga circles, especially after this court case on Friday, Jamal Satli Iglesias. And basically it all started back when Malaga were playing in the Champions League, the glory days. And as we'll all recall, both me and you, that there was a lot of investment into the squad back then. We had some superstars join us, and possibly one of the best ever Malaga squads assembled as they played in the Champions League. But all that success came at a cost, and the club found itself in huge amount of debts. And I don't think that was helped by their exclusion from European football the next season. So I think they were floundering a bit. So that's where BlueBay came in, but not into the club, but into the holding company that owns the 97% of shares in Malaga. That's an important differentiation overall. So they've not come into the club, but they've come into the NAS Spain 2000, who are the company that hold that 97. So for the tidy sum of €1, Alex, you could get yourself a chunk of Malaga. And in 2000,
even I can afford that as a student.
Exactly. I think I could have a few bits of this. Basically, the club was split into two owners, really, with Al-Thani taking, not the club, sorry, the company was taken into two owners and split into two, with Al-Thani taking 51% and then BlueBay having the other 49%. But then it was also apparently agreed that BlueBay would take management of the football side of things. A bit similar to what's happened with Manchester United recently with Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He's bought 25%, but he's also taken football operations under his control as well. However, this is where it gets a bit ugly. So during the 2013-14 season, Al-Thani basically ordered a breakup with BlueBay. He argued that they never actually closed an agreement. He would later report that he'd been the victim of a scam by his own employees, who then later testified against him to say that wasn't the case. The club's shares were then relocated away from the offices at La Rosaleda to a new company formed by Al-Thani and his family called NAS Football. He must have a thing for NAS, I'm not too sure. BlueBay then had to follow up this action a couple of years later in 2015, basically denouncing Al-Thani for his actions, for misappropriation, for breach of contract. And they presented the court with evidence of a ratified property sharing agreement. And basically, the court decided to say, well, we need to take a look at this. And they took some precautionary measures which prevented Al-Thani from selling any of his shares. Since then, this is the really long part of the story. So since there have been several lawsuits, appeals filed by Al-Thani, whilst the Sheikh tried to manage the club from Qatar. You'll notice he's not been in Malaga a lot recently, which, isn't a conducive way to run a football club. You need to be hands-on when you're in a football club. And I think that's why we felt the club has obviously suffered in the long run. We find ourselves in the position we find ourselves in because of this has been going on in the background. And then basically the first major step in this case came in 2019 when Judge Ramon Jimenez Leon, I had to get that right, ruled in favour of BlueBay and requested an execution sentence to give control of the club to BlueBay and those 49% of shares. Then once again, Al-Thani threw in an appeal, which was a complete spanner in the works. He took it to the provincial court. There was then a pandemic, which meant it dragged on for a lot longer than the 2 years that we'd anticipated. And as we know, in that whole scenario, the club has deteriorated even further. We've suffered, we've had relegations, we've had money scares and things like that as well. So it's not been a great situation to find ourselves in from where we were, Champions League quarterfinalists, to where we are now. And obviously with this result and this verdict on Friday from the Supreme Court.
Yes, I mean, it's a fall from grace, I think, is the way to put it. So you did mention the Supreme Court there. Last Friday, they gave their verdict and upheld the original decision and ruled in favour of BlueBay, bringing an end to this case. What does that mean for the club, for Al-Thani and for BlueBay?
Well, like I said, I think the really important thing to remember here and not to get confused about is that as much as they've been awarded 49% of shares, it's not 49% of shares in Malaga. That would be a completely different kettle of fish, a different story. It'd be a great story, to be fair, because then between them and the APA, they'd have a majority, so it'd be a lot simpler. But this 49% has been awarded to the shares of the company that owns that 97%. So NAS Spain is what they've got 49% of. The other half, the 51%, the majority shareholding still belongs to Al-Thani and his family, though that's now being controlled, just to make it a bit more complicated, by Jose Maria Munoz, who we know is the juridical administrator and the man who's currently in charge of all financial matters for these companies. But basically, BlueBay just wanted two things out of this case. They wanted the 49% of the shares and they wanted control of the club. That was the second ask. That was the part they didn't get in this verdict. So again, this is why we're still kind of at a stalemate and really not much further down the line, in my opinion. But, that it will differ between different people. So they didn't get that. There basically wasn't enough evidence to say that the judge could give them control of the club as well as that 49%. So Al-Thani still retains his 51%. He's still the majority shareholder and therefore still technically, even though not at the club, still in control of the club. So
that begs the question that I think is on everybody's lips. What happens now?
I don't know, really. I know that me and you've been doing a lot of reading about this, Alex, over the last 24 hours since we decided that we needed to do a bit of emergency pod on this. But it's hard to tell, and I don't think anyone truly knows. Al-Thani, as I said, still controls the majority of shares, and through his Twitter remarks, it's not all just lions and having pops at the management or the players and things like that. He says he doesn't want to sell his shares. We saw a few months ago the interest from QSI that was rumoured, the Qatar Sport investments that own PSG and bits of Braga and bits of other clubs, and basically said he wouldn't sell his shares to anybody. And he's made that abundantly clear several times. What we do likely know is that we won't be seeing Al-Thani and BlueBay working together. Weirdly, if we could get them together to try and get the club out of trouble first and then decide what we're going to do next, that might be a bit more of an appealing factor, but they're just not going to get on at all. There's too much bad blood involved in that relationship now, unfortunately.
I think there's more chance of pigs flying over La Rosaleda than that happening, isn't there?
There would. There must be a nice Spanish term for that somewhere. Where Alex, like I say, we could go real Phil Quito and Sidlow on this and chuck in some Spanish mannerisms or funny sayings.
We could. I feel like we'd be here for hours.
We could.
So you talked about that option not working. What are the other options? What could work?
I suppose there's a few really. BlueBay could sell the shares. So like I said, they've got this 49% now. They could kind of like cut the losses and say, right, well, we've got what we wanted. Let's get out. We don't want anything to do with the club, though. What Jamal Satterley Iglesias said the other day would maybe say different. They could try and buy the remaining shares from the APA. Obviously, there's that remaining 3%, but that still wouldn't give them enough shareholding to have majority control of the football club. They'd still be outranked by Al-Thani in that case. And not to delve into this too quickly, but obviously there's still the outstanding issue of the 1%, which was allegedly purchased with the club's money, but nothing's been resolved in that case. And we don't know what would happen to that 1% either. I don't think it would automatically go to anyone if it was to be pulled back. But as I just mentioned before, BlueBay claim that they're in it for the long haul. And I read it in, I think it was Radio Malaga Marca the other day, saying that they're in it for the long haul. Jamal Satterley Iglesias saying that he was planning on laying his first brick of the new Malaga within the next 12 months, which sounds optimistic, but we've heard these things before, maybe not just from a Malaga perspective, but we've seen it many, many times with many, many football clubs that, agendas are there and people's agendas change over time. And, we'll see what happens with that moving forward.
Yeah, no, we've seen it, and it's going on in English football a little bit now with Reading, and it's sad to see, and especially for Malaga fans. I think it's got to the point where now we just want the situation to be resolved in the best way possible, and for the club to be able to move forward. Because at the moment, it kind of feels like we're being held back a little bit. We can do as well as we can with the minimal resources that we have, but there seems like there's that sort of that thing that's stopping us from growing. And hopefully, if this gets resolved, we can move forward onto pastures new and, regain some of the former glory that this club once had. So I hope that's, it explains most of the queries. I think, there'll always be questions surrounding this. I'm not sure that, the lawyers involved know 100% of all the details, so do forgive us for covering it all.
I think we need to caveat it and say that we've been looking at this maybe over the weekend and really focusing on it in the last 24 hours. We are not experts in this by any stretch of imagination, especially all things to do with the Spanish judicial system and how that all works. But what I do know, when things go to Supreme Court and Supreme Court's made a decision, then that's final. So at least we know this is a step along the road. The can has been kicked. We're further down. But what happens next will be interesting. And I think Malaga are in for a very interesting 12 to 18 months. And hopefully for the better, because the longer that this goes on, the more the club suffers, and it's going to get harder and harder to escape the position that we're in at the minute. And it's already a daunting task, as we both know.
It is. And you say hopefully the Supreme Court decision is final and no one tries to reverse that, because that would be a nightmare.
I don't think they can. If it's like the Supreme Court in this country, unless I suppose, I don't know. I don't really know how it all works, because I don't know if it's anything to do with it's technically sport, but it's also business. So I don't think they can go to it like a European court. Maybe I'm not too sure, but we'll find out. We'll find out.
Well, if ours has got anything to go off, we're not too hopeful after all that's been going on. Yes, so we hope you understand, what's going on, and hopefully we can have a solution to this problem that feels like it's been going on for as long as I've supported Malaga. Do keep your ears and eyes open for any other information, and we will relay that to you. But in the meantime, we will see you later on in the week for our normal weekly pod. Thank you for joining me, Nick.
No, thank you very much, and cheers for everyone for listening at home. I hope it's not been too boring.
Yes. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the main podcast later this week.